In 1974, the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia that quietly became the foundation of American global power. Not a military treaty, not a trade agreement, a currency pact. Every barrel of oil on Earth would be priced and sold in US dollars. That single arrangement gave America something no empire in history ever had: the ability to print the world's reserve currency backed by the one commodity every nation needs. And right now, that arrangement is crumbling before our eyes. China is the largest oil importer on the planet, and Beijing has decided it no longer wants to pay in dollars. Saudi Arabia, the very kingdom that sealed the petrodollar deal 50 years ago, is listening. Petrodollar is dying. If you think this is just financial news, you're not paying attention. This is the tectonic plate beneath the entire global economy shifting. And what comes next will reshape the world you live in. Let's go back to the beginning, 1971. Richard Nixon takes the dollar off the gold standard. Overnight, the US currency has nothing backing it. The world panics. Gold prices skyrocket. Inflation explodes. America's credibility is on life support. So what does Washington do? 3 years later, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flies to Riyadh with an offer the Saudis can't refuse. The petrodollar system was never about oil. It was about ensuring global demand for the dollar would never end. The deal was elegant in its simplicity. Saudi Arabia would price all its oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, America would provide military protection and weapons. Every nation that needed oil, which is every nation, would first need to acquire dollars. This created permanent, artificial demand for the American currency. The dollar didn't need gold anymore because it had something better: oil. And just like that, America found a way to export its inflation, fund its military, and maintain global dominance without firing a single shot. But every deal has an expiration date, and this one is 50 years old now. Here's what the petrodollar really gave America: not just economic advantage, weaponized finance. When every oil transaction on Earth requires dollars, every central bank on Earth must hold dollar reserves. That means every nation is essentially lending money to the United States just by participating in global trade. Privilege. The US can run trillion-dollar deficits. It can print money at will. It can sanction entire nations by simply cutting them off from the dollar system. Print, spend, sanction. Think about that. No other country on Earth can do this. If France prints too many euros, the euro collapses. If Japan floods the market with yen, inflation destroys their economy. But America exports its inflation to the rest of the world because everyone needs dollars. The entire global financial system is built on one country's currency. This is what economists call the exorbitant privilege. And it's the reason the United States has been able to fund endless wars, maintain 800 military bases worldwide, and still keep its economy running. But what happens when the world's largest oil buyer decides it doesn't want to play this game anymore? China imports more oil than any nation on Earth. Over 11 million barrels per day. More than the United States. More than the entire European Union. And every single barrel has to be purchased in a currency controlled by its biggest geopolitical rival. If you're connecting these dots, you already see the problem. Beijing is funding American power every time it buys oil. Every dollar China acquires to pay for Saudi crude is a dollar that strengthens the very system designed to contain China's rise. China is literally financing the empire that seeks to limit its growth. So what's the rational move? Eliminate the middleman. Pay for oil in your own currency. The yuan, the renminbi. If this revelation is opening your eyes to how the real world works, hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide. Because what comes next connects all the dots. In 2018, China launched the Shanghai International Energy Exchange, a platform where oil futures are traded in yuan, not dollars. Yuan. He who controls the currency of oil controls the destiny of nations. The Western media barely covered it. But in Beijing, it was treated as a strategic milestone, and it was only the beginning. December 2022. Chinese President Xi Jinping arrives in Riyadh with the kind of reception normally reserved for American presidents. Red carpets, fighter jet escorts, a royal welcome that sent shockwaves through Washington. Xi in Riyadh. This wasn't just diplomacy. This was a signal. Saudi Arabia, America's most important Middle Eastern ally for half a century, was openly courting Beijing. And the discussions weren't about human rights or democracy. They were about oil, priced in yuan. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been clear. Saudi Arabia's future is not tied exclusively to Washington anymore. The kingdom is diversifying, economically and geopolitically. The Saudis are hedging their bets, and Washington knows it. In 2023, Saudi Arabia joined the BRICS alliance. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now the world's largest oil exporter. That same year, Riyadh accepted yuan-denominated payments from China for the first time. The 50-year-old petrodollar pact is being rewritten in real time. The media calls it a diplomatic shift. Follow the money, and you'll see it's a currency revolution. But why now? What changed? That brings us to something most analysts refuse to discuss openly. In February 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, the West unleashed what it called the most devastating sanctions package in history. They froze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves held in Western banks. Frozen. The message was clear. Cross us, and we will seize your money. But here's what Washington didn't anticipate. Every non-Western nation watched that moment and asked the same terrifying question. If they can do this to Russia, can they do it to us? When you weaponize the dollar, you give every nation a reason to find an alternative. Saudi Arabia watched, China watched, India watched, Brazil watched, the Gulf states watched, and they all started quietly, systematically reducing their dependence on the dollar. 1. Central banks bought record gold in 2022 and 2023. 2. China dumped over $200 billion in US treasuries. 3. BRICS nations accelerated local currency trade deals. 4. Saudi Arabia began accepting yuan for oil. The sanctions against Russia didn't just punish Moscow. They accelerated the very de-dollarization that Washington feared most. Sanctions accelerated collapse. It's the most spectacular own goal in modern economic history, and the consequences are only beginning to unfold. BRICS was once dismissed as an acronym looking for a purpose. Not anymore. As of 2024, the expanded BRICS bloc represents over 40% of the world's population and over 35% of global GDP. This is no longer a fringe group. It is the new center of gravity. And at the core of BRICS strategy is one goal that unites every member: reducing dependence on the US dollar. Russia and China are already trading energy in yuan and rubles. India is buying Russian oil in rupees. Brazil and Argentina explored trading in their local currencies. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Iran all joined in 2024. New currency order. There are even discussions about a BRICS-backed digital settlement currency. Not a replacement for national currencies, but a neutral unit for international trade. As the historian Niall Ferguson noted, the shift from one reserve currency to another has always been slow, then sudden. We are in the slow phase right now. The question is when sudden arrives, and the answer might be closer than anyone in Washington wants to admit. But there's a dimension to this story that most commentators completely ignore. Every empire in history has been built on controlling the dominant energy source of its era. Britain ruled the world because it controlled coal and the shipping routes that carried it. America rose to dominance through oil, not just producing it, but controlling how it was priced and traded. Whoever controls how energy is traded controls the architecture of global power. This is why the Petroyuan isn't just a financial instrument. It's a geopolitical weapon. If China succeeds in making the yuan a major currency for oil transactions, it fundamentally rewires the global power grid. Nations that trade oil in yuan no longer need massive dollar reserves. They no longer need to buy US Treasury bonds. They no longer need to tolerate American foreign policy to maintain access to the dollar system. This is what keeps strategists in Washington up at night. Not a military invasion, not a cyber attack. The possibility that the world simply decides it doesn't need the dollar anymore. The greatest threat to American power is not a weapon, but a currency. And China is building that alternative, one oil deal at a time. But there are powerful forces fighting back, and this is where it gets truly dangerous. Make no mistake, Washington understands exactly what's happening, and it's not sitting idle. The United States has responded to de-dollarization with a multi-front strategy. Defend the dollar. First, military presence. The U.S. Fifth Fleet is stationed in Bahrain, right in the heart of the Persian Gulf. Aircraft carriers patrol the Strait of Hormuz. The implicit message to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states is clear. Your security depends on us, not Beijing. Second, financial pressure. Any bank or institution that facilitates large-scale yuan-denominated oil trades risks being cut off from the SWIFT payment system and the U.S. banking network. They are using the very system people are trying to escape as a tool of enforcement. Third, diplomatic persuasion. Behind closed doors, American officials have warned Saudi leadership that embracing the Petroyuan could jeopardize the U.S.-Saudi security relationship. Empires do not decline gracefully. They fight with every tool they have until the very end. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Every act of coercion validates the reason nations want alternatives. Every sanction proves the dollar is a weapon, not just a currency. The harder Washington grips, the faster the world slips away. And this paradox is accelerating the very shift America is trying to prevent. So what happens to ordinary people when the petrodollar weakens? Let's be brutally honest. Everything. If global demand for the dollar declines, the United States can no longer export its inflation. Those trillions printed during COVID, they come home. Interest rates rise. The cost of borrowing for the government explodes. The national debt, already over $34 trillion, becomes unsustainable. 1. Import prices surge as dollar weakens. 2. Government borrowing costs skyrocket. 3. Military spending faces real budget constraints. 4. American standard of living adjusts downward. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow erosion. But look at the data. The dollar's share of global reserves has fallen from 71% in 1999 to under 58% today. Slow, then sudden. Meanwhile, gold purchases by central banks have hit record highs. China has been quietly accumulating gold for over a decade. Russia built massive reserves before the Ukraine conflict. These nations aren't just diversifying. They're preparing for a world where the dollar is no longer king. And if you're watching this from the West, you should be preparing too, because this final chapter reveals what almost nobody is willing to say out loud. Here's the truth that neither Washington nor Beijing wants you to fully grasp. We are witnessing the transition from a unipolar financial world to a multipolar one. The petrodollar era is not ending with a bang, but with 1,000 quiet deals. It's not that the dollar will collapse tomorrow. It's that it will slowly, steadily lose the privileged position it has held since 1974. And with it, the ability of any single nation to dictate the financial rules for the entire planet. China doesn't need the yuan to replace the dollar. It just needs enough countries to accept it for oil, gas, and trade, creating a parallel system that operates outside American control. And that system is already being built. Parallel system rising. The petrodollar didn't just buy oil. It bought American hegemony. The Petroyuan doesn't just challenge a currency. It challenges an entire world order. As the great historian Will Durant observed, a great civilization is not conquered from without until it has destroyed itself from within. The question is no longer whether this shift is happening. It's whether we're honest enough to see it. If you made it this far, comment Petroshift to prove you see what's really happening beneath the surface. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about?